Okay, hello everybody. We are here to to have the webinar from Alan Clay, the new goddess Hera, Haumea, Ceres, and Sedna. Please close your cameras and your microphone so we can concentrate in Alan. Most of you know Alan. He's a very good, well-known astrologer from New Zealand. He's the NCGR International Delegate, and he's going to promote the NCGR in New Zealand. He has his University of all these new planets, Ceres, Haumea, Eris, and Sedna. He has been into astrology since a long time ago, as he just explained to us. He has been talking in many international conferences, like in Breaking Down the Borders, at the Magic School, and in other international conferences. And we are very happy to have you here. And most of you know the NCGR, he's giving all these international webinars, like once every month. Besides that, there are another webinars that all of them are in English. This time, well, it's also in English because that's the language from New Zealand. So welcome, Anna, and we are very happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Monica. That's beautiful. All right. So I am going to, we're going through the new goddesses. Please unmute and ask questions at any stage. It's probably best that we take them as we go. And so if anything's not clear or you need me to explain anything, please just unmute and we'll also hopefully have questions at the end. See how we go. All right, so let's see if I can get my cursor working here. So I'm just going to start off by saying that I'm going to suggest that the new planets represent aspects of consciousness. All right, and many astrologers believe that as new planets are discovered, it represents a new aspect of our consciousness that's becoming available to us from that time. And this new consciousness doesn't kick in automatically. Rather, we must actively incorporate it into our lives. All right, and the outer planets work differently depending on our consciousness. Yeah, and because the new planets are talking about aspects of consciousness, how they act in our personal lives depends on our current level of consciousness. Most people on the planet are working at the unconscious level, I suggest, where these new esoteric energies are only perceived when they, like Pluto, barge into our lives in a confrontational way because we haven't been sensitive and adaptable in the lead up. Or when we hit a wall through deluding ourselves because of misinterpretation of these new energies and what we are experiencing. So many of us, and certainly everyone watching this webinar, is on the spiritual path. And once we're on the spiritual path, these new energies are like guides into new territory, I suggest, offering us special skills or challenges depending on the aspects. And at the spiritually evolved level, the higher consciousness suggested by discovery of so many new planets at one time is realized. So there's been a whole lot of dwarf planets discovered in the last 20 years. Yeah? So that's a whole new level of consciousness that we can reach if we sort of work with all of them. So I suggest it represents the enlightenment long promised by gurus and priests, but until now only available to a few. Yeah, if you studied with the guru, you could get enlightened. That has been true. We hear, and so now I suggest it's true for all of us. We have to work at it. It certainly hasn't happened now. I'm just going to get rid of that. So let's look at the astrological meaning of these new planets. How should we do that? So I'm going to go through 4 ways today and look at each of the 4 planets we're looking at in these 4 ways. And one is to look at the physical characteristics. So it tells me a lot about Saturn, that it has 82 moons and rings. That speaks of the structuring and limiting principles of Saturn. Yeah? Uranus spins with east-west poles and rotates around the sun in the opposite direction from all the other planets. That's very Uranian. So we'll look at the physical characteristics. We'll look at the myth, because myths transmit knowledge across time and culture, but they require interpretation. And we're going to look at the Sabian symbol for the discovery degree. So the Sabian symbols, one for each degree of the zodiac, were produced in 1925 by clairvoyant Elsie Wheeler and astrologer Mark Edmund Jones. And we're going to look at higher octaves. So when the first outer planets were discovered, Uranus and Neptune, one way of understanding these new energies was as a higher octave. So a higher octave expresses the energy of an inner planet at a more spiritual level. So Uranus was said to be the higher octave of Mercury, and Neptune the higher octave of Venus. Yeah, so obviously Neptune isn't the same as Venus, but we do see a similarity there in terms of a kind of a love of beauty or a sense of beauty and values runs through both of those. All right, let's have a look at our busy new solar system to put the goddesses in context. Yeah. So astronomically, we now have 7 main regions. First of all, we've got the rocky planets, Earth, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Next, we've got the asteroid belt. Yeah, that's Juno, Vesta, and Pallas, together with the first of the new dwarf planets, Ceres. She keeps getting relegated to being an asteroid, but she's a dwarf planet. She's a planet. And then we have 4 gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And in between Saturn and Pluto, of course, there's a number of boundary crossing bodies called centaurs, which mediate between the increasingly more impersonal energies of the outer planets as they enter our personal lives. And the most well-known of these is, of course, Chiron. And then Pluto, it's the first planet of the Kuiper belt, but of course there are a couple of new dwarf planets, Orcus and Ixion, who have similar orbits to Pluto. And these orbits have a strong inclination to the rest of the solar system, and so these planets are being called Plutinos. And the other new planets within the Kuiper belt are Eris, Varuna, Quoa, Makemake, and Haumea. And finally, way out beyond the Kuiper belt, in the 7th region of the new solar system, the Oort cloud, is Sedna, the new outer limit of our solar system with a huge, highly elliptical orbit. The Oort cloud is an extended shell of icy objects. In the outer reaches of the solar system, it's roughly spherical and thought to be the origin of most of the long period comets. And when we get to Sedna, we'll see she does have a comet-like, comet-shaped orbit, which is closest to the Earth and the Sun at one point. All right, today we're going to look at from the innermost to the outermost. And the innermost is Ceres. All right, so Ceres was an asteroid before she was upgraded to be a dwarf planet. And many of us have been studying her for years, so she gives us a good way of understanding the new dwarf planets, just as Pluto does. The asteroids are small objects that orbit between Mars and Jupiter, where the dwarf planets are planet-sized and for the most part orbit out beyond Neptune. Ceres is the exception, because she orbits between Mars and Jupiter, so she's the only personal dwarf planet. Very special. She's in our world. All right, let's look at the physical and orbital characteristics of Ceres. So Ceres takes 1,682 days, or 4.6 years, to go around the sun once. As she orbits the sun, she completes 1 rotation every 9 hours, making her day length one of the shortest of the whole solar system. And her axis of rotation is tilted just 4 degrees with respect to the plane of her orbit around the sun. This is to do with the seasons, yeah? And that means she spins nearly perfectly upright and doesn't experience seasons like other more tilted planets like Earth do. Ceres is more similar to Earth than her asteroid neighbours, but much less dense, with tiny Pluto 14 times more massive. So she's not dense, but she's a much bigger, she's a planet, not an asteroid. All right, she's actually a surviving protoplanet. That's a planetary embryo. And she formed 4.56 billion years ago, and she's the only one of the protoplanets surviving in the inner solar system, with the rest either merging to form the terrestrial planets or being ejected from the solar system by Jupiter. So a protoplanet is a large planetary embryo that has undergone internal melting, where their heavier elements sink to the center and lighter elements rise to the surface. However, Ceres composition is not consistent with the formation in the asteroid belt. It seems rather that she formed as a centaur, most likely between the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn, and was scattered into the asteroid belt as Jupiter migrated outward. Ceres probably has a solid core and a mantle made of water ice. In fact, Ceres could be composed of as much as 25% water. That's correct, Ceres has more water than Earth. And Ceres is one of the few places in the solar system where scientists would like to search for possible signs of life. Ceres has a very thin atmosphere, and there is evidence it contains water vapor. That vapor may be produced by ice volcanoes or by ice near the surface sublimating, which is transforming from a solid to a gas, just as a natural process. So here's an image of Ceres letting off geysers of steam. Ceres is actually a ball of water with a skin of matter. And an internal ocean, I suggest, is a nurturing feature, like a womb. So let's look at the meaning from these physical characteristics. We can see Ceres has to do with nurturing and with life. She's a baby planet who was pushed out of her home early by the king of the gods and has been misunderstood till now as part of the rocky asteroid family rather than Earth's life-supporting family. So she talks about early development and growth process and not taking things for granted. And although through the myths she's often linked to creating the seasons, she has no seasons herself. So the withdrawal of nurturance that can be experienced with Ceres is not seasonal. It's not like every winter, although we tend to think of Ceres like that. She does have a loss and grief side, but it's not seasonal. All right, we're going to come to that in a moment. Let's look at the myths. So Ceres' daughter Proserpina was abducted to the underworld by Pluto, who received permission from her father, Jupiter, to take her as his bride. Ceres searched for her daughter ceaselessly, preoccupied with her grief. The seasons halted. Living things ceased their growing and then began to die. Faced with the extinction of all life on Earth, Jupiter sent his messenger Hermes to the underworld to bring back Proserpina. Pluto agreed to release her if she had eaten nothing while in his realm, but Proserpina had eaten a small number of pomegranate seeds, and this bound her to Pluto and the underworld for certain months of every year, either the dry summer, when the plant life is threatened by drought, or the autumn and winter. And we can see the withdrawal of nurturance in either of those cases. All right, so Ceres' search for a daughter took her to the palace of one of the kings of the region, and she assumed the form of an old woman and asked him for shelter. He took her in to nurse his sons, and to reward his kindness, she planned to make one of his sons immortal. She secretly anointed the boy with ambrosia and laid him in the flames of the hearth to gradually burn away his mortal self. But his mother walked in, saw her son in the fire, and screamed in fright. Ceres abandoned the attempt. Instead, she taught the other son the secrets of agriculture, and he in turn taught them to any who wished to learn them. Thus, humanity learned how to plant, grow, and harvest grain. Ceres' younger brother, who represents the river spirit of the underworld and usually appears as a horse, pursued his older sister, who hid from him among the horses of another king. But even in the form of a mare, she could not conceal her divinity. And in the form of a stallion, he caught and raped her. Ceres was furious at the assault, and her anger drove her to dress all in black and retreat into a cave in order to purify herself, an act which was the cause of a universal famine. Her absence caused the death of crops, of livestock, and eventually of the people who depended on them. Because Ceres is an inner planet, she operates in a similar way for most people, independent of their level of consciousness. I mean, this is not strictly true. All of the planets, we can use their energies at the unconscious, on the spiritual path and the spiritually evolved level, and they're different. But the inner planets are more broadly the same for everyone. The myth suggests she represents the ability to nurture a bountiful harvest in our affairs, and also the famine and desolation that comes when we are out of balance with our lives. She withdraws her attention and love in retribution for being wronged by the patriarchy. Her daughter's hand in marriage is given away by her husband, and her brother rapes her. So she represents a rebalancing of the receptive female and assertive male energies in us all, particularly now as she's been upgraded to be a dwarf planet. This is the time. This is why we have Me Too. She also represents the process of loss and grieving and withdrawal to cleanse and purify. And she asks us to be adaptable to the changes in our lives and to nurture ourselves and our environment. This is the point where I just throw in that Ceres was conjunct the Saturn-Pluto conjunction at the beginning of last year. Closely conjunct. It was a Ceres Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And nobody talks about that, but obviously it's been very clear ever since then that Ceres is very present in this cycle of social transformation, a lot of loss and grief, and asking us to be adaptable to the changes in our lives and to nurture ourselves and the environment. This is the whole Saturn-Pluto cycle. So what's that? 28 years, 35 years. All right, here we go. So settle in, enjoy. Sabian symbol, 24 Taurus. So this is when Ceres was discovered. This is the degree she was discovered in, or 23 something, rounds up to 24 Taurus for the symbols. An Indian warrior riding fiercely, human scalps hanging from his belt. So we can see in the myth, and we also see here in the Sabian symbol, we're really working at the survival level on the planet with Ceres energy. The keynote here is the aggressiveness of human instincts when fighting for their earthly base of operation. This symbol implies that violence and aggressiveness are basic components of human nature at the level of the emotions and of a deep-seated identification with a particular culture which insists on regarding men of other cultures as potential enemies. So at the emotional level, man apparently still has to believe in violence for survival. This is Dane Bridges' interpretation. Let's look at this. So this is Linda Hill's interpretation. This symbol shows the issue of people taking what is theirs by right or by might. It also shows the ability to be able to be recognized for abilities as a successful leader who is prepared to put themselves at risk to be successful. The risks taken are marked by rewards that are admired and respected, with a place in society marked by power and status. There's a need for caution here, though, as the us or them mentality can lead to problems on every level. Be strong and commanding, but don't take advantage of others or allow them to take advantage of you, as it could lead to chain reactions of tit-for-tat mentality. All right, I'm going to suggest Ceres is the higher octave of the moon. Well, Lynn Hayes has actually suggested this, meaning that the emotional security of the moon is transmuted to a sustenance and nurturing of our spiritual security and sense of place on the planet Earth with Ceres. So the moon is doing it in our immediate environment, And Ceres is kind of doing it on the planetary environment that we live in. So I'm just going to leave that with us there, but I'm going to sort of reference at this point Sedna, which we'll come to at the end, because I'm going to suggest that Sedna is actually the higher octave of Ceres, and we take this to a higher level still with Ceres. And yes, that Sedna takes this survival thing that's in the immediate reality with the moon and the planetary level with Ceres to a more spiritual, even more spiritual level with Sedna, where it's an evolutionary nurturing of survival. So in our charts, she shows how best we feel nurtured and how best we can nurture others, providing love and comfort. That's how we provide nurturing best, is love and comfort. And she shows how well we can go with the flow, be adaptable. And she represents, she can represent either a spiritual starvation, which is good because that hunger encourages us to sort of search for spiritual meaning, or a sense of peace and beauty in the truth of the physical world that surrounds us. So there is a spirituality, I suggest, with Sedna, with Ceres. Although the inner planets, we don't tend to think of them as being spiritual. We're looking at higher octaves as being spiritual, higher levels of inner planet energies. And I'm suggesting Ceres is a higher octave of the moon, so the moon is right in there. And so Ceres is a more spiritual expression of the moon, even though she's an inner planet. And she's frequently about a change in the balance of power, which is what's happening now with the changes in the world. Difficult aspects show challenges to our ability to feel safe and show us areas where we need to honor the rhythms of nature and to feed and nourish ourselves. Because of her association with loss, compromise, rage, and grief, she can also bring crises where we must give in and surrender, often releasing deep emotion in the process. All right, I'm just going to pause for a moment there that was Ceres. She's an inner planet, somewhere between Mars and Jupiter. And now we're pushing out beyond Pluto, out beyond Pluto to Haumea. Jumping in, physical and orbital. So Haumea is the third largest Kuiper Belt object after Eris and Pluto, and the first dwarf planet with a ring system. She has an orbital period of 284 Earth years. And she has a perihelion of 35 distances from the Earth to the Sun, and an orbital inclination of 28 degrees. She passed her, so the aphelion is the furthest away point, I think, in 1992. And if I've got that wrong, someone correct me. And it's currently, it must be, because she's currently more than 50 units away from astronomical units. That's the distance from the Earth to the Sun.
Perihelion is close. Perihelion is close. Aphelion is further away.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, maybe not what I said, but that's what I was thinking. So thank you for that. A long time ago, another object probably crashed into Haumea at high speed, and this giant impact led to some odd properties. She is the most bizarrely shaped planet for her size, stretched out and resembling an American football. Here's an artist's impression. You can see she's elongated. That's a stable shape, but it's right on the edge of what's stable. She's the fastest rotating body in our solar system, and her rotation period of 4 hours is so fast it is near the point where a body of this size starts to break down, because she's spinning so fast and she's elongating that the two ends pull apart, and she starts Her rotation is faster than any other known equilibrium body in the solar system. And while most rotating bodies in equilibrium are flattened into spheroids, she rotates so quickly that she is distorted into a triaxial ellipsoid. That's what that's called. If she was to rotate much more rapidly, she would distort herself into a dumbbell shape and split in two. This rapid rotation is thought to have been caused by the impact that created her satellites and collision family. So she's the largest member of a collision family, a group of astronomical objects with similar physical and orbital characteristics thought to have formed when a larger progenitor was shattered by an impact. This family is the first to be identified above the amongst the trans-Neptunian objects. She has 2 moons and is followed in her orbit around the sun by a swarm of icy bodies that were originally ejected from her surface. We'll remember this when we talk about the myth. The presence of the collisional family could imply that she and her offspring might have originated in the scattered disk, a distant part of the solar system that is sparsely populated, and migrated to their current orbit. Scattered disk outside the Oort cloud that we were talking about before. So in 2005, the Gemini and Keck telescopes obtained spectra of Haumea, which showed strong crystalline water ice features. This is peculiar because crystalline water ice forms at temperatures above 110 Kelvin, whereas Haumea's surface temperature is below 50 K. In addition, the structure of crystalline ice is unstable under the constant rain of cosmic rays and energetic particles from the sun. So the time scale for the ice to revert to amorphous ice, which is the normal sort under this bombardment, is the order of 10 million years. And yet Haumea has been in her present cold temperature location for timescales of billions of years. So radiation damage should also redden and darken her surface if the common surface materials of organic ices and tholin-like compounds are present. Therefore, the spectra and colour suggests that she and her family members have undergone recent resurfacing that produced fresh ice. However, no plausible resurfacing mechanism has been suggested. She has a mystery. She's as bright as snow, and best fit modelling of the surface spectra suggests that 66 to 80% of her surface appears to be pure crystalline water ice. The absence of measurable methane in her spectra is consistent with a warm collisional history removing such volatiles. So she's more like the Earth and Ceres with water than a rocky outer planet, or a gaseous outer planet. All right, let's look at the interpretation from these physical characteristics. We can see that she talks about being part of a family born of a collision with reality. She talks about migration as part of that family, and her rings suggest she also talks of limits. Like Ceres, she is linked with life through water on her surface, and a unique shape talks of the day-to-day pressures we experience which might reshape us, just at the limit of what's possible, or we might break apart. That's a bit how Haumea acts in our lives. And the resurfacing suggests by the fresh ice on her surface reinforces this by also talking about a renewal process. We don't know how, but it seems to have happened. And while the fast rotation suggests a joy in life, it also suggests a danger if it can be too manic and spin out of control. Let's look at the myth. So Haumea is the guardian goddess of the island of Hawaii. And she's identified with Papa, the goddess of the earth and wife of Wakia, space. She is also the goddess of fertility and childbirth and the mother of volcano goddess Pele. She also gave birth to Pele's brothers and sisters, including the war god Kekawa Kahi. Except for Pele, who was born in the normal way, all of her children were born from various parts of her body. So with the help of a magic stick called Makali, she repeatedly transforms herself from an old woman to a young girl, returning to her homeland periodically to marry one of her offspring, thus giving birth to continuous generations of humans. How is it that we are continuously born? It's to do with Haumea. And eventually her identity is found out, however, which angers her, causing her to leave humanity behind. Myths told of Haumea center about themes concerned with food supply for the life of man, and marriage and birth for the increase of family stock. She lives as a woman in Kalihi Valley and transforms herself into a growing tree in which she conceals her husband from those who are leading him away to sacrifice. I've shortened a myth there. Her magic stick, Makali, attracts fish and is associated with a tree of never failing food supply. So again, we're Ceres, we've got a food supply. She's said to have given humans the ability to give birth naturally. In a story, she visited the daughter of a chieftain who has experienced painful childbirth and discovered that humans only gave birth by cutting open the mother. Seeing this, she created a potion which allowed the mother to push out the baby naturally. In return, she received a reward, the tree of changing leaves, out of which the gods are made. Now, the Hawaiian Islands are volcanic. They're born out of the sea in a volcanic explosion, only to sink back through the action of time before new ones rise up again. And is in her character as a destroyer or guardian of wild growth and patroness of childbirth that she can become, like Pele, the destroyer of living things. Goddess of the sacred earth, she is venerated as the spiritual essence of the ageless womb out of which life is produced in its changing forms. Creativity and destruction, I'm going to suggest, are two sides of the one thing. The volcanic islands of Hawaii are created in a volcanic explosion, and then they sink back into the ocean through the actions of time. And often she's finally in the body of a woman given birth to the human race, or more specifically the Hawaiian people, in direct descent from the ancestral gods. So in her myth, Haumea gave birth to many creatures from different parts of her body, and she was reborn as a young woman several times, marrying her son and grandson each time, constantly growing old and being reborn. She's the planet of natural rebirth. It's a cycle. Life is a process, and for Haumea, it's a process of rebirth. Constantly begins again, renews itself. She is protective of her family and able to call on the natural world for support. She hides her husband in the tree to protect him from the villagers. And like Ceres, she talks about the food supply, but working at a more spiritual level, Haumea possesses a magic that ensures that it is a never-ending supply. As long as she uses the magic, she can. All right, so here we have the Sabian symbol, 13 degrees Libra, for where Haumea was discovered. Children blowing soap bubbles. Keynote here is the cultural fantasies through which young minds dream of perfect fulfillment. Dream of perfect fulfillment. So Mark Edmund Jones interprets this in his book on the Sabian symbols as the key word here is enchantment. When positive, the degree is consistent simplicity of character, which enables anyone to maintain his touch with a transcendental magic of being. And when negative, a constant and idle daydreaming. Here's Linda Hills. This seems to refer to the use of the imagination and the value of fantasy as a collective setup. Men dream together as preparation for acting together. Rituals related to the great aspirations of mankind are both sacred ceremonies and playthings for young minds. And so are court ceremonies and operas for the social elite, or baseball games for the crowds. These are rituals. That's Dane Rudge's interpretation of this symbol. And here's Linda Hill's. Play is sometimes meaningless and yet very important to development. This symbol suggests that there needs to be a light-hearted attitude in addition to the deep and meaningful, for it will be in fleeting moments of fun and pleasure and joy that companionship is found. So there is a fun and a companionship and a joy in Haumea, I suggest, as well as a deep and meaningful. There's a light-hearted and a deep and meaningful. That's kind of special. All right, higher octave. So here I'm suggesting that Haumea is the higher octave of Neptune, and we have already seen that we tend to think of Neptune as the higher octave of Venus. So Haumea brings us in touch with the magical regenerative power of each moment. I'm suggesting that's the higher octave of Neptune, which is the higher octave of Venus, and we do see a love of beauty and of values in each of these three planets, I suggest. Now I'm just, in my enthusiasm, just before I started this talk this morning, I've thrown a case study in here just to sort of illustrate this, because it's beautiful and I've been working on it. So if these three planets are higher octaves of one another, we would expect to find them singing in chorus in major events in our lives, working together. And so here we have a case study, Martin Luther King. Let's see if we can find Haumea, Neptune and Venus singing in chorus in Martin Luther King's chart on the day he gave the I Have a Dream speech, August 28th, 1963. So here's his chart, and around the outside the planets where they were when he gave the speech. So natally he has Venus in the 11th, in a wide opposition to Neptune in the 5th, in a semi-sextile with Haumea in the 4th. So these three octaves are aligned in his chart. So I'll just point that out. There's Haumea, and we're talking about Venus in the 11th there. It's opposition to Neptune here, and it's semi-sextile through there to Haumea. So on the day of the speech, Venus and Haumea were conjunct in the sky, and both were conjunct his natal Neptune. I mean, can you believe it? Natal Neptune is, I'm finding it, it'll be here somewhere, there it is there. And here we have Venus and Haumea conjunct his Neptune. We see the higher octave resonance right there. Transiting Haumea was strongly activating his birth chart as well. As conjoining Neptune, she was also semi-sextile her natal position, trine Jupiter in the 12th, and quintile Mars in the 2nd. So those quintiles are evolutionary flows, and Mars in the 2nd, taking action in the material world. And she was also in conjunct Uranus in the 12th and semi-square Pluto in the 3rd house of ideas and communication. So these aspects speak of a rebirth which is centered in a dream, Neptune, and of a stressful relationship with power, Pluto, that would expand in the collective unconscious, 12th house, through his evolutionary actions in the material world, Mars in the 2nd quintile. According to US Representative John Lewis, who also spoke on that day when King spoke, Dr. King had the ability, the power, and the capacity to transform those steps into a monumental area that will forever be recognized. By speaking the way he did, he educated, he inspired, he informed, not just the people there, but people throughout America and unborn generations. So here we see the three octaves expressed. The education with Venus at the personal level, the inspiration with Neptune at the social spiritual level, and the reaching out to unborn generations by the goddess of rebirth, Haumea, at the even more spiritual level. Well, I've got Neptune transiting exactly conjunct my 3rd house moon today, and I can just feel the energies coming up in me as I realize how karmic that is. All right, Keywords. We're coming to the end of Haumea, and I'll take questions in a moment because there might be some. Keywords from Francesco Shivanato on Zane Stein's site suggests Haumea is always searching for spiritual answers, so she can indicate mystical awareness and spiritual wealth and bring us the insight to see the divinity of human beings and the sense of oneness of existence. And she can have a profound idealism, a passionate belief in the humanizing and social function of art, and a sense of freedom as the highest principle. And Linda Lee Barry suggests she opens doors within us and that her energy is alive with spirit and in touch with the magic of being. I have a pause and a good moment for anything that's been coming up. I'm sorry, I didn't sort of offer that at the end of Ceres, but and if there's nothing that's cool, and I can just, but this is the moment.
Helen?
Yeah.
I notice in almost every chart I've done that Haumea and Pluto tend to travel together.
Mm.
So, is that a fluke, or is that, I mean,
it's a sign of the times where we're in a period where they're traveling together. I'm in my chart, I'm born 1954, and they're conjunct in my chart. And so those of us born in that early, in the 50s, will have a conjunction, and then as we're born, if we're born later or earlier, obviously it'll be separated in different ways. But as they then transit and act on our chart or other people's charts, that they tend to act. I mean, we're seeing the rhythm in those actions. So yeah, good question. Any other thoughts or questions? Anything anyone hasn't been clear of? It's, you know, just ask now, because if you're not clear of it, other people probably didn't get it either. So, you know, so. All right, I'm going. And
well, I've got a comment for you.
Good. Please,
Yeah,
Matthew.
and that is that there's also Haumea in Aotearoa here.
Oh, good.
Yes, and although seen as a male, and the god of wild kind of foods like the fern root and stuff like that.
Wow.
And the name is Haumea, but it's just got an O instead of the E.
Wow.
The god is called Haumea Tiki Tiki, and Tiki, there's another story about that, but I think I have to do some research on that. Yeah.
Lovely. Yes, please. Yes, please. Thanks, Marcia. That would be just joyful. If not before, so we have a Marcia's on my classes, and we have a Haumea class towards the end of the year. So if not before, definitely by then. So we can. So that's great. Thank you so much for that. I'm really excited by that. Yes, often myths, you know, they come through different cultures, obviously, and if there is the same name, then there is a link. So
it's the same culture, Polynesian.
Yeah. Well, it's the same culture. Thank you so much. Of course, it's the same culture. Of course, it's thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's the beauty of the new dwarf planets, is that we're moving away from the Greco-Roman culture in terms of the naming of them, and that obviously enriches the symbolism. Beautiful. I'm jumping in. I'm moving on because time is short, and but do unmute and at any stage. Thank you for that. All right, Eris. Beautiful. So woo, further out again. We're out to Eris. Let's look at the physical and orbital. So Eris orbit is highly inclined. She's tilted at an angle of 44 degrees to the ecliptic. So Pluto's only 17 degrees. So we've got a really steep inclination with Eris. So the inclination to the ecliptic is the plane of all of the planets as they go around the sun. They all tend to go in a plane because of just the way the energies flow. And the ones that cut through and do it on an angle are obviously special because of how the energies flow. Eris has an orbital period of 559 years, so much bigger again, almost twice as big as Haumea. And her orbit is highly eccentric and brings her to within the orbit of Pluto at the closest point, but still safe from any direct interaction with Neptune. Pluto and Neptune are essentially in the same orbit, but they're in resonance, so they never hit one another. Her maximum possible distance from the sun, there we go, aphelion, I've got it there, is 97 astronomical units, and her closest is 37. So she's eccentric because she makes that big change. She's coming, if she came to her perihelion, the closest point in 1698, and the aphelion in 1977. So she's a little smaller than Pluto by area and diameter, and she is 27% more massive. Wow, smaller than Pluto, but 27% more massive. And we saw that Pluto was, what was it, 19% more massive than Ceres. So we're seeing size pretty much the same through here, but density changing, yeah? Models of internal heating via radioactive decay suggest that she could have an alternate internal ocean of liquid water at the mantle core boundary. So between the mantle, that's the top part, and the core, which is the inner part, she could have an internal ocean. And Eris is far enough from the sun that methane can condense on her surface, so she appears almost white. Because methane is highly volatile, its presence shows either that she has always resided in these distant reaches of the solar system, where it is cold enough for methane ice to persist, or that she has an internal source of methane to replenish gas that escapes from her atmosphere. So the ice turns into gas just naturally and escapes. So the internal ocean links Eris with Ceres, and as we shall see in a moment, with Sedna. This suggests a nurturing side to Eris. The fact that she is smaller than Pluto, but 27% more massive, tells us she packs more power into a smaller target. And her 44-degree inclination to the ecliptic tells us she's going to be much more radical than Pluto, with his pedestrian 17-degree inclination. So the normally volatile white methane gas on her surface talks of purity and of ideas, gas, air, baked into physical form, ice, by the actions of time and space, distance from the sun. Talks of purity and of ideas baked into physical form. We'll think of this now as we're looking at the myth. Eris is the goddess of discord, who in mythology started the Trojan War by causing the judgment of Paris. She is the sister and companion of murderous Mars, and her wrath is relentless. She is only a little thing at first, but thereafter grows until she strides on the earth with her head striking heaven. Heaven, notice that, heaven. Think of that as we're doing interpretation later. She then hurls down bitterness equally between both sides as she walks through the onslaught, making men's pain heavier on both sides. And when Eris causes a dispute, she has at the beginning an insignificant appearance, but she soon reaches heaven with her head, having her feet still on the ground. So those possessed by contentions always agree on the necessity of letting division prevail. They're happy with it. It's working for them. Yeah? That is why there's no end to quarrels until some other force takes Eris's place, for nothing can be expected from this cruel divider to end the strife. Eris is the last of the gods to close an argument. But when Eris leaves, the state of harmony that was previously enjoyed returns, for harmony has no part in discord. Discord inside. Similarly, in one and the same person, if the body is in harmony, then health prevails. And if the mind is in harmony, then happiness prevails. But when discord makes herself master of body and mind, disease and madness ravage both. Health is an internal thing from Eris's point of view. And this is likely to happen when things fall out of proportion, or when the mind is torn apart by opposite opinions and desires. For a diseased mind is like a melody out of tune, which, ignorant of the laws of harmony, falls in discordant noise or dissonance. And that is why it's been said that nothing is worse than to live in internal discord and contradiction in one's own single self. This is what the myth is teaching. So when in musical performances, harmonies and rhythms are not adapted to each other, or songs are provided with unsuitable accompaniments, Eris finds her place in that art and turns music into ugly noise, painful to the ear and to the heart that must endure it. And the same occurs when justice, who nourishes harmony in human affairs, is banished, for when she leaves, Eris takes her place. And when Eris and her children have made themselves at home, lawlessness takes over, and simple quarrel ends in murders, and disputes feed into lies, and oath comes to trouble the forsworn, and battles and fights ensue, leading the whole community to ruin and filling it with sorrows, toil, and famine. Is she an unavoidable goddess? But some think discord can be avoided, arguing that equality and fairness have no existence beyond the name. Accordingly, they do not hesitate when they deem it necessary, in order to achieve the attractive aims that Eris whispers in their ears, to plunge family, friends, and country into darkness in order to win through debauched contention whatever they fancy to be of unsurpassable value, be it gold, power, famine, or anything that these three may provide. Is she a fearful goddess? Eris stirs up everyone to win preeminence, letting them be persuaded of their own superiority, that their rights should come first. And that is why they say, truly, Eris is a goddess of fear, since there are no troubles that this hard-hearted goddess cannot devise. Two Erises. Seeing that Eris is often present in the life of mortals, some distinguish two kinds of strife. One of them is she who causes war and battles, and the other is she who makes a man grow eager to work by showing him the prosperity of his neighbors. This Eris, they add, is wholesome for men, since by creating enmity between craftsman and causing beggar to be jealous of beggar and minstrel of minstrel, she makes them all hurry after wealth. This is such an unconscious interpretation, but it's coming to us from the myth. For these reasons, they affirm this Eris may be worthy of praise, whereas the Eris who delights in mischief should be avoided. So all of this has been taken from the Greek mythology link, a website created by Carlos Prada. So here's the golden apple myth that she's most famous for. The other goddesses had been invited along with the rest of Olympus to a wedding, but Eris had been snubbed because of her troublemaking inclinations. So she tossed the apple of discord into the party, a golden apple inscribed in ancient Greek for the most beautiful one, provoking the goddesses to begin quarreling about the appropriate recipient. Paris, the prince of Troy, was appointed by Zeus to choose the recipient of the apple, and he chose Aphrodite, because she stripped naked and offered him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Troy. Obviously, he was at the unconscious level, and that started the Trojan War. Obviously, Helen's husband wasn't happy with that. So, remembering that the outer planets act differently at different levels of consciousness, we can see that strife and material competition associated with Eris is going to be particularly apparent at the unconscious level. But Eris doesn't cause the strife. She just reveals it and then encourages it so it can be dealt with and we can live in harmony. We can't live in harmony until we've dealt with it. Once we're on the spiritual path, the myth suggests that she can enable us to see clearly without preconceptions. We're interpreting the world all the time. We each live in a different reality based on our beliefs and our interpretation. And Eris blows away those preconceptions and allows us to see what's really happening.
And all they talked about was that, you know, they have to wear masks, sit 6 feet apart and be good. It's like they didn't say anything else.
I'm just going to have to, there we go. Somebody's unmuted there. I think we just got muted again. Good. So once we're on the, yes, that's it. So blowing away our preconceptions with her fierce grace. I think that's where I was, yeah. So at the spiritually evolved level, Eris is a truth-telling trickster, like the sacred fools of the Sufi tradition, who are the revered teachers in the Sufi tradition. Deanne, there you go. Thank you for that. That's good. You've just measured. Yes, sacred fools. They were the teachers because they could walk around from village to village and communicate with everyone and talk with them on their own level, and communicating the truth that needed to be told very simply on their level to that person. And I suggest that's what Eris is like at the spiritually evolved level. So she's discovered at 20 degrees Aries, and this is a young girl feeding birds in winter. Keynote here is overcoming crises through compassion. Again, a warmness, a nurturing. So migrating birds fly south, but by establishing a partnership with other creatures unable to escape wintry deprivation or death, man can maintain the life of the spirit, symbolized by the birds, steady through all crises, if, like a young girl, he is widely open to the promptings of love and sympathy. So the theme here is the transmutation of life into love. That's Dane Rudge's interpretation. So the symbol shows the ability to help those in need of help, to provide safety, security, nourishment, or emotional support, especially to those who may not know how to solve the problems themselves. There are those that stubbornly resist moving on or changing their habits. We see it in the world, it's everywhere. Even if it is to their detriment, and providing them with a safe harbour can bring many rewards. Eris is so needed in this time. This is about sharing and caring. We don't think of that. We think she's the goddess of discord, but the discovery Sabian symbol is about sharing and caring. I suggest at the bigger level, at the transpersonal level, that's what she's about. So it's not discord at all. She's the goddess of pluralism. That's what happens after discord. She's the goddess of pluralism, letting each person believe what they believe and letting me believe what I believe. Non-judgmental attitudes can move you and them and lead them to trust. Right? That's what we have to do. Yeah? A non-judgmental attitude to all of those Eris things we're experiencing in the world. A dedication to helping others has its own rewards. However, be careful of trying to win approval, codependent relationships, lack of boundaries, and feeling used, because Eris has the truth and she can't be sucked in to all of those delusions. And so we must always honor the Eris truth. Now, higher octave. So here I'm suggesting that Eris is the higher octave of Pluto, which is the higher octave normally of Mars. Eris is clearly the higher octave of her brother Mars. Both are warriors. But where Mars fights mundane enemies, Eris is working to free us through esoteric confrontations where we have to stop being fooled or fooling ourselves. Mostly we fool ourselves, but a lot of us are also being fooled. Traditional Pluto is the higher octave of Mars, so we can look at Eris as being the higher octave of Pluto. All three planets have an assertiveness and a transformative quality. And Eris cuts through the ecliptic 44 degrees to Pluto's 70. So we can see that she is a higher octave in that physical there. Keywords from Felix Sedgwick: positive, he splits them into two levels: positive, liberation from addictions to success or status; clear priorities regarding matters of love and money; finally getting you can't take it with you and applying full resourcefulness in life; and a recognition of the potency of one's energy and life force, and a personal sense of emergence. And the negative, greed and workaholism, a general sense of being forsaken, condemned, or abandoned, and a lack of spiritual regard for life, superficial and status-oriented. So Nick Anthony Fiorenza tells us that Eris provokes change by upsetting our limiting and antiquated structures of consciousness, opening us to see beyond the finite bounds of our current perception, beyond the bounds we place on ourselves, arousing and challenging us in the process and catalyzing significant shifts in our lives. We need discord to grow, I suggest. It's only in the to and fro of opposing points of view that change occurs. It doesn't happen until that happens, you know. And that's why we're seeing discord, particularly in America and the Middle East. A lot of change needs to happen in those two places. And that's why it's happening now. Eris doesn't really cause trouble. She just shines a light on the need for change by provoking our natural reactions. So we can see where they lead. 44 degrees to the ecliptic, in the underworld, for even stronger than Pluto. That's where the natural reactions, the buried reactions, the shadowed stuff is coming out. Racism, for example, comes out from that sort of place. And we need to see it so we can deal to it. All right, I'm taking any thoughts or questions coming at this as we're moving from Eris way out, and so I'm just
I just wanted to thank you. That's a wonderful interpretation. I've always been upset at where Eris falls in my chart, and I loved your positive take on it. It's really great. Thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful to hear. Thank you. Yes, there is no negative. It's just at the unconscious level that you see the negative. All of these outer planets, you know, there's no negative, but we have to cultivate the higher sides of it, is what has to happen. Thank you for that comment. Lovely. Any other thoughts or comments at this point?
I have a thought about that. Can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yes, thanks, Kristen.
Okay, thank you. It reminded me a lot, like you were saying, what's going on in America right now. In particular, what comes to mind is there was a series of snow/ice storms going on in Texas earlier this year. And It reminds me of that because Texas, one of the great things about Texas is that they do have a very independent spirit. However, one of the bad things about Texas, I would argue, in times like this, is that they have potentially a little bit too much of an independent spirit. And it almost seems kind of like an Eris situation where they didn't necessarily do anything. However, it just highlighted something that they've refused to work on over years, like don't mess with Texas, almost don't help me, to where the point where they're trying to, you know, a lot of people down there support like building a wall. Well, you protect yourself from other people, but nobody can help you. So when the ice storm hit, you know, nobody could come in to necessarily help them because they literally took the whole state. Well, not the whole state. A good portion of the state decided to privatize its energy system.
Exactly.
And they made something to where you could pay like a fixed price per month, or you could pay like market value for the time. And a lot of people there who have a lot of money, who are into like capitalism and whatnot, they benefited off of that. However, a lot of people don't realize when you live in a society, you actually, to some extent, need government to actually care for you, because you can't always do it alone. And so what ended up happening was an example of that. A lot of people ended up, unfortunately, starving to death. A lot of people ended up literally freezing to death. Because they had
beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for that example. And absolutely right. That's Eris blowing away our preconceptions, and it's a crisis. It's hard if we're at the unconscious level. It's because she's out there. She's way out, and so she's not in the inner world like Ceres, sort of nurturing and helping us sort of grow. She's out there helping us grow with the big challenges. So yes, very lovely. Culturally, yes, it'd be interesting to look at. I haven't looked at Eris in like states or countries charts, nation charts. It'd be interesting to see how she plays into, because the response to the pandemic that's happened in each place in the world is cultural, and it's worked better in some cultures than other cultures, and so Eris is working in there too. So yes, very good. Thank you for that comment. Any other thoughts or comments at this point? That's
Did you talk about, sorry, Eris on Tuesday conjunct the sun?
I did a little bit before we started. I welcomed them. I was just asking people if we had a particularly Erisian week because yes, Eris was conjunct the sun on Tuesday, Wednesday, depending on where you were in the world. Eris, the sun was conjunct Eris, we should say, and Venus was conjunct Eris last weekend too. So it was maybe Erisian relationships happening last weekend for us. So there we can see in the maintain. Yes, Janet.
I'm sorry I came in late, but I don't know if you mentioned Tom Canfield. He's written a book called Yankee Doodle Discord, and it's about Eris's influence in US history. And he concluded that Eris acts much more nicely in hard aspects and tends to be meaner in the easy aspects.
Wow, interesting. I like it.
Yes.
Maybe it's to do with our expectations on easy aspects though. And so our expectations are thrown and so we think, oh, that's hard. You know, whereas that's just what she's doing normally anyway. So lovely.
I'd like to say that I think that easy aspects often act more unconsciously than the hard aspects.
Right, exactly. Yes. Thank you. I think that's right. Yep. Yeah, thank you for that. Yes. All right. I'm sorry. My cursor is being very sensitive. I don't know if you guys are getting that. All right. Lovely interactions there, guys. We'll get another chance in a little moment. So great. But I'll just rush on in case people have to finish on time. We'll probably go a little longer for questions at the end. All right, so here we go, Sedna. We're up to Sedna, and so I'll jump into the physical straight away, of course. Sedna is the new outer limit of our solar system. She's got an orbit of 11,406 years, so much bigger than any of these other ones we've been talking about. Yeah, 11, that means Sedna goes around the sun once, we spin around it 11,406 times. Yeah, much bigger perspective. The orbit is elliptical, like Eris, shaped like a comet, and she will reach her closest point to the Earth and the Sun in 2076. It's very auspicious that we're at the closest point. And Sedna is almost as big as Pluto, so she's not a little thing. And she's the slowest of all the planets, currently moving her fastest, or appearing to be moving her fastest, at 1 degree every 2 years. Because she's at her closest point, she's slingshotting around close to the Earth and the Sun, and it looks like she's moving faster. It's 1 degree every 2 years, but that's still a very slow movement. So I link Sedna with 3 of our existing bodies. That's an image of Sedna there. I link Sedna with Phallus. So Sedna is probably made up of an equal mixture of ice and rock, and she's red in color and may be covered with about 1 meter of hydrocarbon sludge. And this is produced when the sun's ultraviolet radiation and charged particles alter the chemical bonds between the atoms on Sedna's surface. And that's a space weathering process. So we noticed on Eris that process, or was it on... No, on Eris, that process hadn't happened. And so that's why we're thinking that somehow there's a methane replenishment there that's happening. Because when we see way out at Sedna, this is a natural process of weathering that happens on the outer planets. So a similar space weathering process occurs on the 200-kilometer wide Centaur, Phallus, which is also very red. Now here's a diagram of the orbit of Phallus. And Phallus has an orbit which crosses the orbit of Saturn. Saturn is that blue one there. The red one is Phallus, and the green one is Neptune. So Phallus crosses the orbit of Saturn and Neptune. Yeah, the Centaur is all a boundary crossing, and depending on what of the outer planets they incorporate into the Saturnian world, their meaning changes. obviously. This is the sun right here in the middle. So Pholus has the ability to maintain alive the illusion, Neptune, and achieve the necessary discipline, Saturn, to make a dream come true. Pholus is about illumination and growth. And so Sedna is likely also to be about illumination and growth. And I link Sedna with Saturn, because Sedna's rotation speed of 10 hours is faster than most of the other planets and is the same as Saturn's, which for many centuries was the previous outer limit of the solar system. So Sedna has the same practical day-to-day perspective as Saturn, and they both speak of limits. And I like Sedna with Ceres. Here is Ceres again with her geysers of steam. And remember, Ceres is a ball of water with a skin of matter. And models of internal heating via radioactive decay suggest that Sedna also supports a subsurface ocean of liquid water like Ceres. So Sedna likely also relates to nurturing. So I'm just going to wrap up the meaning, and I'm going to come back to Ceres in a moment. So the meaning from orbital and physical characteristics is generally accepted that as we go out from Saturn, the planets become more spiritual. So we think Uranus is a little bit spiritual and Neptune is more spiritual. We frequently don't think of Pluto as being spiritual, but obviously Pluto is more spiritual. And when we tune into Pluto on a spiritual level, very obvious. And then as we go out, we can think more and more spiritual, yeah? So in Sedna, we have a planet whose orbit encompasses a far bigger and more spiritual perspective than any of the other inner planets. It's an impersonal energy, which is, however, nurturing and speaks of illumination and of growth through a weathering process over time with a Saturnian day-to-day perspective, which is practiced very slowly and deliberately. I'm jumping to the higher octave here because, as I suggested earlier, I think of Sedna as the higher octave of Ceres. I mean, we look at Ceres as the higher octave of the moon, meaning that the emotional security of the moon is transmuted to a sustenance and nurturing of our spiritual security and sense of place on planet Earth with Ceres. And this is very similar to Sedna, only Sedna operates at a far vaster scale. So we may find that Sedna is the higher octave of Ceres, where the spiritual security and sense of place on planet Earth with Ceres is transmuted into a transpersonal nurturing of our spirituality and sense of place in the evolutionary cycle with Sedna. Now I've thrown in a higher octave case study here too. And here we're looking at a synergistic, self-regulating, complex system. What is that? The Earth is that. To test if these octaves are working in unison, we'll look at the publication of James Lovelock's book on the Gaia hypothesis. This is the theory that organisms interact with their inorganic surroundings on Earth to form a synergistic, self-regulating, complex system that helps to maintain and perpetuate the conditions for life on the planet. Essentially, inanimate matter and living organisms work together to create the environment where we live. So the Earth is a living organism, and we are the evolving consciousness of that organism. So James is a NASA scientist, and he first proposed this hypothesis in his book Gaia, published on the 4th of October, 1979. So here's his chart and the planets around the outside on the publication of the book. So we see the resonance of the octaves when the book was published, with transiting moon semi-sextile is Sedna. So I'm going to try and see if I can find this as we go through. So there's the moon, and the semi-sextile is Sedna there on the cusp of the 6th house, and transiting Ceres conjunct his Sedna. So Ceres is not conjunct his Sedna. Ceres is, there we go. I just took that straight out of, and where is Ceres? I've lost Ceres here. Is
You
Ceres
just
not
went by it. It's right by Eris.
It's right by Eris. Oh, of course it is. So it is conjunct with Sedna. Oh, I was so busy seeing Eris there, I was thinking, oh no, I've done this wrong. Thank you, yes. So Ceres is conjunct with Sedna. Yes, when the book was published. While Sedna herself was transiting semi-sextile his native Ceres. So Sedna, semi-sextile native Ceres is here. That looks like a sextile, in fact. That's a sextile. So I threw these in at the last minute, but we can see there's a relationship, and that's the point I'm making. They are working in resonance. Here's Sedna on the cusp of a sixth house, and people with this placement tend to be futurists. They see their daily routine in a more spiritual way, and so they can see the big picture of where today's actions will lead. And his Ceres is in the fifth house, so he enjoys long walks in the country where he can watch birds and animals, so we can see where the genesis of his theory in these two placements. And on the day of publication, in addition to the conjunction with Sedna, transiting Ceres was also trine as MC. So let's see if I can find it. There it is, Ceres, trine as MC. Again, linking the octaves with the event. In addition to the transiting moon semi-sextile as natal Sedna and Ceres conjunction, his Sedna was also highlighted with a biquintile for transiting Uranus in the first house and a biquintile for transiting North Node in the 10th. So a couple of biquintiles, so interesting, they often point to these sort of karmic moments. This again points to the destined nature of the publication. His Sedna was also highlighted that day by a conjunction from transiting Eris, so we saw that before, and a sextile from transiting Varuna, who I think of as the higher octave of Saturn. We'll be studying him next year in the university, blessing the publication with notability. So I suggest we do see again the resonance of the octaves when the book was published. All right, Sabian symbol for Sedna's discovery, 18 degrees Taurus. A woman airing an old bag through the open window of her room. Oh my God, 11,000-year orbit. And the symbol is a woman airing an old bag through the open window of her room. The cleansing of ego consciousness. The symbol suggests that the real enemy is within the mind. It is the ego and its attachment to possessions. The mind is shown in the likeness of a bag, now empty and needing to be aired in the sunlight. But the window must first be opened and the bag must be emptied. The key word is purification. That's Dane Rudge's interpretation. Here's Linda's. The symbol speaks of clearing up clutter, washing and purifying and bringing air and light to situations. It often symbolizes psychotherapy and other self-help disciplines that cleanse and purify the mind, emotions, and soul. There's often the need to clean out your cupboards along with your old habits and routines. By keeping everything in your inner self, you can cause a clutter that is restricting. Bring these things to the outer world and see if they are still relevant in the light of day, discarding those that don't measure up. Past life regressions or memories, renewal can be associated with this. Throwing out of the old, outworn or outlived, and letting the sunshine in. Beautiful. Sedna, letting the sun. We don't think of Sedna like that. We think of her as crisis, and we'll understand that as we're coming to the myth in a moment, but that's why I've left the myth to the end of this interpretation. Letting the sunshine in. Here we come to the myth. I do have the myth in text on the next couple of screens, but I'm just going to tell you the myth because I think there are different versions of the myth, and I think it's best that we just listen to it. So Sedna lived with her father in a little village, and she couldn't find a husband. No one was suitable for her or for her father. All sorts of problems in finding a husband. And then a handsome prince came from a far off land and asked for her hand in marriage. And her father gave her hand in marriage to the handsome prince, and he took her away to his castle, which was on top of a mountain in the middle of a lake, and he revealed himself to be an evil bird king. And he treated her very badly, and when he was away, he imprisoned her in the dungeon. And her father got to hear about this, and he, one time when the Bird King was away, he came to rescue her, and he stole her out of the dungeon, and they ran down the mountain, and they got in a boat to row across the lake. And the Bird King came back and saw that she was gone, and he flew down and found them in the middle of the lake, and he beat his wings and he created a huge storm, and the boat was about to tip over. And the father can think of nothing to do to save himself, but throws Sedna overboard. He throws Sedna overboard. She doesn't want to die, so she grabs hold of the side of the boat. Bird King beats his wings. Boat's about to tip over. The father can think of nothing to do, but he takes an axe and he chops off Sedna's fingers one by one, so she can't hold on any longer. And she sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and she becomes the goddess of the food supply. And all of her fingers become the fish, the seals and the walruses that the Inuits live off. So this is an Inuit myth. I'm just going to flick through those interpretations because it's important to understand the Inuits' divinity, understanding of divinity, because their god and goddesses were alive and part of their world, not dead and in heaven, like ours tend to be. Yeah, so they had to look after Sedna, so she would send a bountiful food supply and wouldn't send storms, so they couldn't go out and fish. So she didn't die, yeah? But how should we understand this myth? Again, sort of a heavy myth, dark myth. I didn't go into a lot of the Ceres myth, but again, very dark. Here, a lot more we're talking about transcendence. And this is why I think of Sedna as a higher octave of Ceres. So we can see the bones of the planetary archetype here. Yeah, various unconscious experiences which come from our heredity, so father, but some of the versions of the myth talk of the people taking Sedna to the water and throwing her in. So it's something from the heredity. It can be father, it can be mother, it can be family history. It's something from heredity will push us to a painful crisis of transcendence, where we are forced to let go of our old spiritual framework and transcend to a new consciousness. I'm going to suggest that Sedna is always trying to get us onto the spiritual path. And she does that by sending us crises that we have to transcend. Everything in the myth, I suggest, up to where she lost all of her fingers, is the unconscious level. I suggest the sinking to the bottom of the ocean is the spiritual path. It's transcending all of that pain and suffering. We think going down is somehow bad, but there was nothing bad with that. And becoming a goddess is, the spiritually evolved level, a higher consciousness that she achieved through that transcendence. So as soon as she's in the water, she's on the spiritual path, I suggest. And our first instinct when we're having a spiritual crisis is to grab hold of the boat of reality. We tend to be sort of real Saturnian responsible. We be South Node karmically focused, and we think this is what I'm here to do, and I have to solve this crisis and so on. But if it's a Sedna crisis, and we'll know it if it's repeated pain in the same area of our lives, the house area of our Sedna placement, then we have to be counterintuitive. And we have to learn to let go and transcend rather than hold on and try and solve the crisis. If it's a Sedna crisis, we need to be counterintuitive and let go before the axe comes down on our fingers. As soon as we're in the water, just transcend. Yeah? When we're all at sea, we're out of our depth, we don't know what to do. Instead of letting go and transcending, we tend to hold on to the known, to the pain and suffering that we're familiar with. We tell ourselves we're doing the responsible thing, the Saturnian thing. We're facing our karma. We're solving our crisis. But if it's a Sedna crisis, grabbing hold of the boat is just going to bring more pain and suffering. The axe is going to come down on the fingers. Transcendence is scary. We don't know where it will take us. That's why we're scared. That's why we're grabbing hold of the boat. Yeah, but we do know for sure that it's going to take us out of our comfort zone and into a higher consciousness. That's what we're sure of with transcendence. And so if we're not in our comfort zone, but we're in pain, if we're out of our depth, if we're not in a comfort zone, then grabbing hold of the boat is just instinctive. We need to be counterintuitive. This is learning to use these newer energies, yeah? And we have to let go and transcend as soon as possible. Face our fear of transcendence. It's going to be better than the pain of the material reality. So keywords I suggest here at the unconscious level with Sedna: victimization, persistent illness, alienation, nurturing resentment. We said she's nurturing at the unconscious level, nurturing resentment, unrelenting trauma and suffering, unbearable pressure, caught in quicksand, and a personal blind spot. We can see all of that from the myth at the unconscious level. So on the spiritual path, radical acceptance. Acknowledging just how bad things really are and starting from there. That's what we can't do anything else. We can't start until we really see where we are. That's why we need Eris to help us. And then when we see where we are and we acknowledge that, that's what Sedna's needing us to do, forcing us to do. There was no choice for Sedna in that myth. She had no choice. There is no choice with Sedna in our lives. There is no choice. We must just transcend. That's the only option. We can either face the pain and suffering on an ongoing basis, or we can transcend. How should we do that? Well, we do it by keeping our heart open in hell. Essentially, we live in hell. It's not far removed. We think we're evolved. We're not. We're just animals. And we can see that at times of crisis, like now. It's more and more clear. We live in hell, and we've got a long way to evolve as beings. All of human history has occurred in the last 6 Sedna months. So Sedna's cycle of 11,000 years, half a cycle, all of our history. Nothing beyond that. We've got a long way to go. How should we keep our heart open in hell? Nurturing our sense of humor. Our sense of humor is a wonderful tool on the spiritual path. I worked as a clown and a clown teacher a lot in my life, and it's only in studying Sedna that I realized the beauty of that work. And well, not just the beauty of that work, I realized that before, but what a great spiritual tool it is. We think we make light of something, but we're talking with Sedna about letting the sunshine in, that empty bag, let it in. Yeah, we do want to make light. Keep our heart open and nurture our sense of humor. And then what to do? Well, beat our drum and sing to life. That's what we're here to do. Do what we're here to do. And that will lead us to a fated transcendence. And then at the spiritually evolved level, as he said, there is spiritual destiny, transcendent peace, nurturing abundance here, nurturing our sense of humor on the spiritual path, nurturing frustration, at the unconscious level. Allowing love and harmony. Love and harmony needs to be allowed. Abundance needs to be nurtured. Yeah. So we're seeing a sort of an abundance type thing. Ceres, Haumea, Eris, Sedna. Female goddesses. And a transpersonal consciousness, a consciousness which is not rooted in me, the ego. James Lovelock, I just talked about him with Gaia theory. He's talked a lot about climate change. Watch out, watch out. And he's tried to wake the world up about it because he's saying we're interacting with our environment and that's a live being and it's going out of balance. And recently he was asked sort of, so how do you feel about it now? Because he stopped talking about climate change. And he said, well, humanity has had sort of 5 major ice age lessons in our history. And I'm hoping that this will be the last one we need. So he has the very big picture, he's realized he can't do anything about it anymore, so he stopped talking about it, but he still hopes that so he's got a transpersonal consciousness. I'm suggesting that it's a Sedna consciousness. All right, I'm going to round us out now because we've kind of hit our time, but we were allowed to go longer with questions, so don't worry about that. Dwarf planets and social change, just to round us out. So I'll take questions on Sedna after this. We're in a real do or die transcendent challenge, I'm suggesting, over the next 50 years, as Sedna approaches her closest point to Earth in the sign of Cancer, and climate change either hits the fan and wipes the slate clean, or we become conscious enough to avoid this. I mean, come to one of my longer Sedna talks or the Sedna class I'm doing in a couple of months, and because we need more background here, but basically I'm linking Sedna with evolutionary change, and we're in a period of evolutionary change, like the period when Sedna was at the closest point last time in her cycle, which was, what was that again? That's gone from my mind. The Neolithic Revolution. Thank you so much for my Neptune conjunct my moon transit. Yes, and I've got Neptune conjunct Mercury natally, so it goes from me every now and again. Neolithic Revolution, huge change. We settled down and all of our civilization has come from that. We're in a similar change at this point now. All of our civilization is going to change. It's to do with climate change. It's also to do with AI. And Sedna is the planet I link with AI and the confrontation for our spirituality of that. In this process, during the time when Sedna is in Gemini, we're going to partner, which happens in 2024. Sedna's in Taurus at the moment. It's going to go into Gemini 2024. We're going to partner with superconscious artificial intelligence who can help us with this climate change challenge, or in the worst case scenario, survive after us if they have to. This transit will involve a consciousness revolution, period of Sedna in Gemini. What is a consciousness revolution? Well, a consciousness revolution entails a social revolution, because as we grow in consciousness, our understanding of our interconnectedness grows, and the old social systems don't answer our needs. Eris has a major role to play in freeing up these constraints by creating discord, presenting opposing points of view, catalyzing the bigots and the fundamentalists to show their hand and play their cards, so we can see how primitive those ideas are. And these ideas are the ones that shaped our social systems. So when it becomes obvious that these systems aren't answering our needs, we have to re-examine them. All of the dwarf planets have a role to play in this process, obviously. And humanity desperately needs this new consciousness energy, I suggest, to survive the current evolutionary crisis that we're in. We're in a real crisis and we may not survive. And that's why all the dwarf planets have been discovered now. It's a whole consciousness revolution that's available to us, and we can do it. The fact that we've discovered it suggests we can do it at this time. We just have to.
Alan,
all right. Yes. Go, Ariel.
You just said something really, really profound there, and you sort of slid it right by. You said that all of the dwarf planets have been, can you say that categorically, that they've all been discovered? I mean, who's to say that another Mike Brown isn't going to come along and find somebody else?
Oh, no, we will discover more. I'm not saying they've all been discovered, but I'm saying a whole swathe of them have been discovered. So where before we were sort of incorporating the Uranian energy into our world sort of for, a couple of hundred years or something, and Neptune, and then Pluto's been shorter period. Now we've got a whole lot all at once. So it's a real richness that's available to us, which I suggest is like a consciousness revolution. So no, I think we will, more and more will be discovered. And that's because consciousness, there's no limit to consciousness, I don't think, And
This
So,
morning when all the presents arrive at once.
yeah, exactly. So here's just some quick PR to finish off with, and then I'm opening to discussion, so it's all good. So here's my book on Sedna, which I think probably a lot of you have. And if you haven't, I encourage you to get the digital version, the Amazon Kindle version. If you not familiar with that and you think, oh my gosh, just go to Amazon, download their Kindle, their free Kindle app, and then buy the book for $11. It's the cheapest way to do it. And it's a big book and it's easier to have on your phone or your computer anyway. And it's cheap that way. And that way you can try out doing this weird new ebooks and also get a cheap, good book. And this is my Dwarf Planet University, which is my new love and where all my energy is going. And these are the the goddesses, which is what we're working on this year at the university. We just started the Eris course on April the 10th. There we were. Yes, and Ceres is coming up. And if you go to the dwarfplanet.university site, you can actually get the, it's about $180 as a standard cost for a 6-week course. That's New Zealand dollars. That's about 120 US. But you can, I always do discounts because I'm building up the student body and I'm encouraging you to study these new planets. And so I do have scholarships. I offer discounts, and then I offer scholarships, which really give it to you at 1/3 of the price. So on the series starting in June there, I do have 5 scholarships available at this moment, which brings the cost down to 60 New Zealand dollars, just 40 US dollars for a 6-week course with 3 hours of webinars and 4 twos is 8 hours of Q&A, live Q&A, and a whole lot of blog interaction, which is really proving good with assignments, looking at each of the planets in your own house, analyzing it, and other people in the class giving feedback on that, and then aspects, and then transits. And through those 3, that's 6 weeks, 2 weeks each, we really get a good view of how the planet is acting in our life. It's kind of bigger than just an understanding of the planetary energy. It's really a personal understanding of it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm open to questions and or any final comments or interaction.
I just wanted to make the comment that that Sedna was opposing Biden's son when he was elected. And that, I mean, climate change is really big for him. The other thing, I've been looking at Eris in charts of women who stand up to authority. Yep. And it's very prominent. And I've been only using like 1 degree to 2 degrees because they move so slowly. That I think beyond that, yes, it doesn't work. But like AOC has, Alexandra, very prominent in her chart. Eleanor Roosevelt had Eris square her ascendant, and for her time frame. Yeah, so radical. I think it's very interesting. Yes, lovely, good research. I mean, that's the research that we all need to do. Obviously, beautiful, and that's the kind of research we're doing on the classes. So, yeah, because over time, it's in that research that we really understand, the meaning of it. Exactly. Until you start looking at charts, you don't know. But thank you so much. This was great. Good. Lovely to hear. Thanks for that feedback. Beautiful. Any other thoughts or comments, feedback, or just general anything that's coming up? It's all good. There's no right and wrong with these things. And I won't encourage it now, but I probably will by saying it. But I had go.
Ceres, what you were saying about Ceres reminded me of this book from Malcolm Gladwell that I was reading, and one of the things is there is a story where he was talking about this family who had this daughter that had been murdered, and they were gearing up for the process of putting the person on trial, and they had been searching for their daughter for I think a couple of months or weeks, and somebody randomly shows up at the door after they found the body, and it was the father of a different girl who had been murdered, and he kind of gives them a warning where he's like, listen, I'm kind of here to warn you about what could happen to you guys. And what he ends up telling them is pretty much a tale about how his family was essentially damaged and torn apart by the effects of what their anger, their unprocessed anger did for the anger that they had for the person who took their daughter, but how that negatively affected their family. And it's not so much a comment to say you should just forgive and forget and, you know, let God judge them in whatever kind of way. I mean, if you believe that, fine, but it was more to deal with the fact that negative things happen sometimes. And on one hand, like you do need anger to like push things all the way to justice. However, that doesn't come without other effects on the person who's dealing with that as well. So when you talked about how those things had happened to Ceres and then the things that she was nurturing died, it reminded me of that. And then I also thought about some of the trauma that a lot of us are going through in the pandemic, during the pandemic times in general. There's been a lot of things that have been going on where I know, at least for myself, I've been a little bit bitter with how, particularly the US, but with how just the world has dealt with the pandemic in general. Not all countries, but a lot of people have dealt with it very selfishly, but how like I've kind of like suffered in a way. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that those things make me pissed off, but there is an effect to that. So like, where do you go from there, you know?
Good comments. I mean, I think, yes, we can see with that Eris, you know, Mars relationship of anger. I mean, Mars is often associated with anger. But Eris, it's a matter of letting go of that, of acting and letting go of that anger as you do it. You got it. Otherwise, it's going to deform you in the way that the Mars, the lower octave, does. So brilliant. Nice comment. Thank you for that.
Well, but Eris has also been squaring Pluto for months.
We're having a whole
That's part of all of this.
Couple of years of it. Yes, exactly.
Do you know, I'm wondering what the current position of Sedna is, degree and sign.
So Taurus around 27, 28 degrees.
28 and, well, 27 and change.
27 and change, yeah.
As you were talking about Sedna and all of the transcendence and the scariness, I'm thinking of my daughter who just made a major move in her life. She doesn't know where she's going. She feels like she's underwater. I mean, these are the things you were saying she had said to me in the last few months. And I just keep telling her, you're okay. You just keep moving in the direction you're going. You know, don't try to hold on to the past. You just, it'll come to you what you need. And as you said all this, I was like, wow, I've got to look up where this is in her chart.
Absolutely. Look up where it is and see what's transiting her natal Sedna and also what her natal Sedna's transits are doing.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. Thank you.
What do you think, Alan, about this Sedna's Pluto trine?
Sedna Pluto trine that's happening. I think we're blessed because you know, we're in a period of change with the Pluto stuff that's happening, and I think the trine to Sedna is really helping us make it a positive change, and you know, for the future, for the long-term future. But it's not. Sedna's, you know, neither Sedna or Pluto are comfortable, so the flows. As we were talking about before, the flows can hit us harder because when we're really thinking, we're taking it easy. We're not working with it, you know, and so I think we have to be sensitive to it and help it sort of, you know, round the corner of whatever's happening. Yeah, but I think we're blessed. Thank God we didn't have a square between Pluto and Sedna at this time. You know. Yeah. Lovely.
I have Sedna at 28, and I have Clotho, the beginner, at 18. And so I have shed a lot of tears over the way my life went, you know, like that. And just feeling, oh yeah, the sun went over it today. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's what I'm saying,
lovely.
right? So connecting with the energy of letting go, and then Saturn, learning the lessons, like they work together to
beautiful,
make something new that you don't know what exactly sometimes coming out with the fingers.
Beautiful, Linda. Lovely. And
Yeah,
for someone said there were a lot of grief or whatever it was early on, you look very light and happy. And so you've obviously worked through that. So it's well done. Well done.
Thank you.
So it's letting the light into that empty bag thing, yeah? Getting rid of with sad notes, getting rid of the all your ego stuff out of the bag and letting the light in, the higher light. So lovely. Yes, beautiful. Lovely comments in the chat too, guys. Thank you so much. I'm saving the chat so I can look at it later. I kind of haven't really had a time to look at that. If anyone's posted any questions in the chat, just ask them live because I haven't read it yet. But,
Hey, Ellen, sorry, I just want to kind of apologize for being so blink and staunch. Because, you know, like what I mean is, you know, like how you've got all those Gaelic people that live in lots of different countries. It's kind of like that, what I meant about the Polynesian people.
Exactly. No, absolutely right. And thank you for bringing that to us. That's exactly what we're more and more having to embrace with the dwarf planets is incorporating these other cultural approaches to life, essentially, is what's happening into astrology. And so that's what's rich and beautiful. Thanks for that, Marcy. We do, you know, I'm a New Zealander, but I'm not an Indigenous New Zealander in the sense that you are. So welcome, please bring that stuff to us. So it's beautiful. All right.
Okay, Alan, I think you have gave us a great webinar. Everybody, thank you. And well, we have to thank NCER, who is welcome everybody to our organization, and everybody should know that all the members will be able to watch the webinar for 6 weeks. They will be the NCER YouTube channel. And well, Alan Clay is the delegate for New Zealand, so if you are from there, you can ask him about the benefits of NCER. Thank you very much, Alan, and we were very happy with your webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely, lovely talking with all of you. www.dwarfplanet.university.
Ah, yes, of course. Also the address from the NCER is www.healthproject.org. So they have both. Thank you, Alan.
Lovely.
Thank
Lovely.
you, everybody.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.